Welcome to the Leaders of Lasting Impact podcast. I'm Matt Pohl, your host, and I'm pleased today to be joined by Nazma Rosado. She is the principal consultant with Avion Consulting. And we asked Nazma to join us today because she has a passion for businesses in general, but also small and mid-sized businesses. And since that's what we're about, really, we believe that small and mid-sized businesses are so important to not only the economy, but our society. We want to highlight people who are helping those kind of businesses throughout the globe. So Nazma, I appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, where are you calling us from today?
I am calling in from a very snowy Carlisle, Massachusetts, which is a little unsettling because we are now in April.
Yeah, in Colorado, April is one of our snowiest months, so we're a little bit more used to it out here. But yeah, it should be tulips and other things, trees budding and stuff like that, right?
You would think.
Again, I'm glad that you joined us today from snowy Boston. Anyway, I'd like to just start off with maybe having you share a little bit about your professional background. What was your journey over your career?
I think the best way to describe it is non-traditional.
Okay.
So, which is probably true for most people, right? I'm not sure there is a traditional path anymore.
Right.
Now, I guess if I go way, way back, I wanted to be a surgeon. And so for me, it was, okay, I'm going to go to medical school and I'm going to be a doctor. And if I'm going to go that route, I think perhaps the best thing to do is to go full tilt. If you're going to be a doctor, be a neurosurgeon.
Okay.
So
Wow.
it can happen. Don't be too impressed.
Okay. I never even thought about that.
So I majored in neuroscience and psychology as dual majors. And actually, while I was in college, I was a volunteer EMT. And during that time, I made the decision that it wasn't for me. Yeah, I actually pulled my applications and I'd already been accepted to one of my top choice med schools. So that was an interesting choice and not really popular with mom and dad.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what I wanted to do after that. I knew that I wanted to be in service of people, and that has always been a consistent theme for me in my life. Interestingly, I thought I didn't want to teach, and I knew I didn't want to be in the labs. So I wasn't sure that getting a PhD would be the right thing. So it
Okay.
took some time to discover what the right thing would be. And I often say I tripped and fell into my career, right? So I lived in New York. I had been raised in New York and I applied for a job at a pharmaceutical company, a little company known as Pfizer.
Okay.
And that was it. Like I started working with them and I ended up spending 28 years in the biopharma industry.
Wow. Wow.
So
What kind of roles did you go through during those decades?
yeah, lots. So I started off in data management, quickly learned that data is not my space.
Okay.
So I went into clinical trial work and I was a clinical study manager, then a study project manager, program manager, and then I switched into more leadership roles. And this is where it really takes me into where I am. So I decided that the thing I always drew the most energy from, what I was most passionate about, was working as a subject matter expert on process innovation
Okay.
ideas and working on training programs and serving as a mentor. And so I decided to go into the process optimization and learning and development space. I think it comes from a real need to, I don't complain and I don't like complainers. So I've always felt that if something isn't working, fix it
Fix it.
or
Okay.
make a change. I
Yeah.
started working in that space. And over time, I really realized that I love the human element of working with individuals and identifying what were the things that complicated their lives and how could I help make it better.
Hmm.
Sometimes it was process innovation, sometimes it was learning programs. Eventually, that started morphing into more and more interest in how organizations run and how people think and all of those key elements. So I went to Gonzaga, very sad that they are now out of the contention for not even
Yeah.
the Final Four. And at Gonzaga, I got my master's in organizational leadership, which then led me into taking a direction with my career that was really more focused on executive coaching, leadership development. So still being tethered to that L&D space. And then actually really working a lot on project management, change management, and organizational design.
Okay.
And it was just what are all of the things that I need to consider if I want to make things better for individuals and for organizations? So definitely a winding road that has now led me to where I am. I left the industry of biopharma after having worked at some really fantastic companies along the way, large and small, some startups. I then started my own company and went out on my own, and it was quite successful, but it was a bit lonely because it was over just prior to the COVID year and then immediately following it.
Right.
So I actually hung up my single shingle and decided to join a larger consultancy, but not one that was super large and had robustly developed processes. Instead, I joined Avion Consulting, which is just made up of great people who customize based on what the organization needs. And that just felt like it fit better for me.
Okay. Is Avion there in Boston, or do they have a national or global presence?
So we have a national presence. We do actually have a global presence, I would say, but we don't do as much work globally as we'd like. It would be great to grow that a bit. We're headquartered out of San Diego, but we're largely a virtual organization.
Okay, that makes sense. Within that consulting practice, what areas do you focus on and what kind of clients do you get involved with, say, from a size and industry perspective?
So one of the great things about pivoting and joining Avion is that it's opened up just a world of opportunities. Because coming from a background that was so specialized in biotech and
Right,
pharma,
right,
when I was on my own, the majority of my clients were of that ilk. And I really love that industry, but I wanted to see how well the methodology is translated and
right.
practically speaking, right? Does what works for one organization work for a different industry of the same size and depth? And so now I work across multiple industries. I work with law firms, I work with big finance firms, private equity firms, some really small ones that carry quite a hefty load on their own, as well as some large, fairly well-known ones. Work with some healthcare organizations and even with an automotive client. So really well spread. And I love it because there's a variation in their size, their reach, and also their needs and, who their customer base is.
Sure. Yeah, no, that variety. It is fun to be specialized, right? You get to really know an industry intimately, but then getting to see that variety, like you said, you see some of the common patterns, but you learn new things. You learn new angles to apply old solutions that you've identified in the past. No, that's great. I'm glad you're getting that broader industry exposure. As you think about some of your clients that you feel like you really are able to help, are there some common challenges or themes that kind of come up that you feel is really in your wheelhouse?
Yeah, I think I've been asked before, is there a specific demographic that really resonates with my approach to coaching and such? And I would say that from a demographic perspective, I work across all different people, which I really appreciate. But coming from a relatability perspective,
Mhm.
I tend to be selected when we do chemistry calls to see who's interested in working with whom by many women, by minorities, especially female minorities.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and people who are immigrated or their families immigrated from another country and they're trying to understand the cultural complexities of the blended environment. So that is one of I guess, the area that I am often selected for.
Mhm.
As far as the things that I see commonly, I'm right now working on building a program about successfully leading a multi-generational workforce, right?
Okay.
Because it's always going to be, right?
Right.
Uh, and I think there's some really key things we need to think about in terms of what are some of our maybe stereotypes of various generations versus what's the reality and how to best leverage them.
Okay.
I do a lot of change management work, and I would say that I probably work quite a bit with executive presence, resilience, And the one thing that pops up, it doesn't matter which industry, it doesn't matter what level, it's imposter syndrome. And how can we get that voice in the back of our head to cooperate instead of to work against us?
Okay. When you look at the solutions that you provide to your clients, do you find that those come from primarily your own experience? Are they coming from other thought leaders that you have, I don't know, maybe pulled into your own personal style or approach? What are the methodologies or tools that you bring to the table when you're helping a client?
Yeah, I am just authentically myself. So
Right.
I'm formed by other leaders in industry. I try to be well read. It doesn't always succeed in that element, but I try to read as much as I can. I definitely spend a lot of time listening to thought leaders and understanding what's on their minds. I have to say, my colleagues are amazing, and I love having the opportunity to work with them because we all have different styles and different ways of approaching things. And so we just learn from one another. But I perhaps learn the most from the people that I serve, right? So from my clients, whether if it is facilitating a session. I last week did a session for a rather large HR group, and we were looking at how to effectively communicate, how to establish executive presence, and how to negotiate and some of those things. And the learnings I got just in their examples and their stories is so enriching. And then, of course, working as an executive coach, my clients teach me things all the time. Right. And so that's really all of that informs me. And I lead with empathy. So I am a high EQ person, I've been told. It always sounds weird to say I'm an expert in this or I'm really good at that, but I've been told. And so for me, it's just I try to relate with folks, try to really listen and connect with them.
Keeping in mind our audience of small and mid-sized business owners and leaders, could you share a story, maybe one or two client experiences where you've had a long-term impact on that client, obviously with the appropriate generalities, keeping the in confidence?
Yeah, absolutely. There's one client that sticks out in such a wonderful memory anecdotal way, where when I met her, she's a physician, an MD, brilliant and just kind and generous and wonderful in all of these ways, but really lacking in self confidence, right? Really feeling, because she actually was or is a minority female or a person of color who's also female, and felt like she was in a space that she wasn't sure she was welcomed in. And so we had lots of conversations about where does that come from? Where is your imposter syndrome coming from? Where is your feeling like you don't fit in, like you don't belong, come from? And how do you define belonging? And what do you need to feel like this is your space? It was such a fantastic, we had a 6-month engagement, and all of our conversations were just the way I coach is it's just real. It's just person to person. And I say to all of my clients, ask me anything and I will answer you honestly, because that's what I'm expecting from you. Right. So we have to establish trust by having some sort of equal footing. And through our dialogues, we found places where we had similar or different experiences that we can then really dive into. It was a fantastic experience for me watching her grow, watching her come out of her shell and own her space. And a lot of it had to do with just really stopping and thinking back about the things that were holding her back were all the things in her head. It wasn't anyone treating her differently or saying anything differently to her. And how do you clear that space, right? So that you can make space to really impact people and the organization in a really positive way. So I always think about her when sometimes you're having one of those days where it's like, I don't want to climb out of bed. And then
Yeah,
it's like she, with tears streaming down her face, called me and said, or we were on a Zoom and she said, you changed my life. Like
right.
you got me to see things in a different way, because she was also closed off to meeting people because she felt all of these things that she was putting on herself. And
Yeah.
that's why I do what I do. Like I want people to fully realize, get to that self-actualization level of Maslow's hierarchy where they feel like they're in control of their destiny and they're not a victim of any sort.
No, that's a great example, right? A brilliant person, skilled in her profession, but the head trash was so powerful, it really was limiting her ability to really, like you said, maximize her impact, which is likely one of her passions, right? I want to do more of this stuff, but these voices, these demons just keep me held back. Yeah.
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 Yeah, exactly. There was another client that I worked with also in coaching, and we were talking through how one of the first things that he said to me was, I don't know why I do what I do. I come here every day. I'm good at my job. I love the people I work with, but I'm not passionate about the work that I do. Like it's very analytical and it doesn't really feed my soul in any way. It does feed your soul, right? What are those things that energize you and just make you feel whole and complete and just happy? And we started peeling away layers of some of the expectations of what his parents had placed on him of what success looks like
Right.
versus, what success feels like. And at the end of the day, it was a combination for him of identifying different committees and different, portions of the organization that he could contribute to in a way that was more fulfilling. So he was really interested in developing others, but hadn't even thought of maybe mentoring people within the organization,
Oh,
right?
okay.
And it seems so simple to those of us on the outside, but when you're in it, you're so deep in it, you don't see it for the trees. And so he started mentoring folks. He actually wanted to stretch himself in some ways. And so he sponsored a couple of affinity groups that for groups that he wasn't really familiar with. And he wanted to become more knowledgeable and more comfortable. And he really leaned into learning about himself and defining what his passion is and is thriving and really has found like even that in figuring out what his passion is, he's been able to get more of a work-life balance because when you really love what you do, it doesn't feel like work,
Yeah.
right?
No, that's definitely true. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. How many folks are you working with at a time? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it depends. I have had up to 20, I think, coaching clients at one point. Right now, I'm probably at, I think, maybe 10 or 12, somewhere around there. They're different cadences, right?
Sure.
So
Sure.
some of them are weekly, some of them are once a month. It depends on what they need. But it's great because it allows me, every call is someone totally different, right?
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
boredom in my role.
Yeah. And it's cool that you're impacting that individual at that point in their life, right? So it must find a lot of fulfillment in that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's say you're having coffee with a small or mid-sized business owner, and just based on your decades of experience of interacting and coaching leaders, might there be a general word of wisdom, thing for them to think about, maybe reflect on themselves that you might want to share?
I think the most underrated leadership competency that exists is leading with empathy. No matter the size of your organization, but especially when you're in smaller organizations where people really look to you for that connection. The more you can lead with empathy, put yourself in their shoes or try to expand your thinking. And for example, from a change management perspective, right? By the time individuals in an organization learn of a change, management has been dealing with it, thinking about it, strategizing about it for 6 months. So
Mhm.
what seems new to the individual who's now hearing about it is something that from a leadership perspective, they're really comfortable with. So if you
Right,
could put yourself in the shoes of an individual who's hearing this for the first time and think back to when we first started talking about this, how did I feel? What were
right.
my concerns? Then you take a different approach. So I think I would say to really any leader, try to hone in on those EQ skills, starting with just leading with empathy.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. It's when you lead an organization, there's so many things calling for your attention. And like you said, you're making decisions a lot. You're used to change, right? It's just the nature of it. And it's very easy to overlook what you think is just a smaller decision that for many of the staff could be a very major decision. Like you said, they haven't thought about what we're doing, a new person being promoted, a new process or system we're putting in place. And it's very easy to overlook that and the impact on those individuals.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I'm certain, Nazma, that we have some listeners who are like, okay, there's something that you checked on or touched on today that really resonated with them. And if they were to want to reach out to you, what would be the best way for them to get in touch with you personally?
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn is the best place. I check it every day. I'm very active on it. And I strongly believe in the power of a network and connecting others. So I would say that is the best place to find me.
Okay, that's great. And we'll put that link in our notes for the podcast so people can get right to you. Okay, we appreciate you spending a few minutes with us today, and we also want to thank our audience for listening in to this episode of Leaders of Lasting Impact, where we really are trying to help small, mid-sized businesses become healthier, become more resilient, to experience growth, if that's part of your desire as a leader, is to grow your organization. And so that's why we have these individuals who are actively working with and helping businesses get better. And that's why we appreciate Nazma joining us today. Please join us for our future episode. And we just wish everybody a good day and success in their business.